Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. We hear what it's been like, their experiences of growing up, their experiences of that sense of identity and belonging. And I say this every week because every week I mean it, and every week I know that I'm going to have an incredibly special guest. And this week we've got Faith Uwadiae. And Faith is a research culture and community specialist at the Wellcome Trust. Faith she's just an amazing young woman, I'm telling you. I'm going to stop the talking because I want to hear from Faith, to be honest, right? But as I said, she's also the co-founder of Black Women on Wheels, right? So we'll come to that in a minute, in a bit. But Faith, it's really good to have you here. And I'm going to kick off by asking my first usual question, which is, can you tell me a little bit, tell me something about what it was that gave you your initial sense of identity, your sense of belonging when you were growing up?
Okay. Yeah, I think it kind of came from my family. So I grew up in London with my parents, and I'm one of four siblings. So both my parents, they moved here when they would have been, I guess, in their late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Moved from Nigeria to the UK. And then I was born here, and so were two of my siblings. But then actually my older sister was born in Nigeria, and I didn't meet her until later, so probably about the age of 10.
Right. Okay.
Which is a bit different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess my sense of belonging has always come from, like, my family's always been quite close, despite the fact that we probably should see each other a little bit more than we do. Whenever there's an issue or whenever anything happens, we're always going to be there and kind of rally round. There's just that, there's always been a safe space that, you can kind of go back to.
Yeah.
The belonging kind of came from, I was very much brought up as a Nigerian girl living in London. And, there were a lot of Nigerian traditions. There was a lot of focus on education. And yeah, I guess that focus on, whatever you do, try and be the best at it, I guess, to a certain extent. Yeah, it was just like a childhood that was filled with food, lots of music, and just general happiness, I guess. But yeah, so I always felt like a strong sense of, like, I guess, belonging from my family. I guess my things of belonging that I always found maybe a little bit harder was more, my parents were very Nigerian and set up in their Nigerian traditions, but I was a Londoner who just happened to also be Nigerian. So trying to balance that with my parents, and also balancing that sense of belonging with being in London, that was always the balance with belonging. But I feel like over time I've managed to be kind of like scope out that I'm very much a Black British Nigerian, and finding that middle ground in both those identities.
I love that transition that you've given us, that sense. I can hear the music in the background playing right now as you're growing up, and all of the love that you were getting given. But at the same time, there was the I'm not going to say the conflict, but the realization that actually I'm a Black woman growing up in London. I'm a Londoner. Yeah. Yeah, I am a Londoner. So how did that play out in, like, your schooling when you were at school? You've already told us that your parents were very had that passion for education. So what was it like for you in a London school? How did you gain your sense of identity there and belonging there?
I think the thing with me that you'll learn is that I was very much always in my book. So I was that person that was, my sense of belonging came from, I guess I had a group of friends who were pretty similar to me. I'd say that we were very much, we were just there because we really enjoyed school. So I was that person that enjoyed all the subjects, and I kind of found like-minded people. So I guess in that, like, sense of belonging, I just gravitated towards people that had those shared values with me.
Right.
Around, like, doing well, because I guess my family had always been very strict. The place that we had, like, conflict was the fact that my family was very strict, and like, who do you want to hang out with after school? I was like, we don't do you want to have a sleepover? We don't do that. Does that mean that under Nigerian tradition, we can't provide for you? It's a whole thing. So it's like the real conflict of like, just culture, I guess, to a certain extent. But it was kind of finding that balance between, I hear you, mum, that's great, but like, this is how I would like to do things because I'm brought up here, and this is how we do things here in the UK. But it was kind of, I don't know if I've described it or really answered your question, but it was kind of finding that in between.
No, that's brilliant, because basically what you're highlighting from what you've said is that there was a conflict, not about the fact that you enjoyed school. It was more of a cultural clash, if I'm right.
Yeah.
That we don't do that. That's not part of what we do. But yet your friends were saying, come for a sleepover.
Yeah, like sleepover. That's a wild concept.
What, we don't provide for you?
Why would you need to stay around someone's house? What, we can't provide food for you at home and shelter? It's very much. And I thought my family were real like out, like just random. And then I met someone else who was their family was from Nigeria, but also from Benin City, and we both like the sleepover thing. It's a thing, right? So yeah.
So, no, I love that. I love that idea. That so it's a different culture. It was growing up in different cultures. So learning to navigate two separate cultures, right? So at school, as you said, you enjoyed all subjects. Okay. What was the teacher's responses to you? Were you the ideal student for them? Did they encourage you? Did they what was their aspirations, I would say, for you?
Yeah, it's a mixture. I guess I think I was your ideal student because I really did love being at school. But then I think sometimes I did probably get away with some stuff because I was the ideal student. So I was often in top set for most things. Apart from maths, where I got downgraded once because I was too chatty for about a year, and then I got downgraded. But yeah, in general, I just really enjoyed studying. I loved being at school. I loved different subjects. I think mostly because I was actually really, really quiet at school. I was quite a shy, quiet person. I had a lot of like my friendship circle, but actually to a certain extent, I got a lot of value and a lot of my maybe self-worth at that point from how well I did at school. And it was something that was always encouraged from my parents. So it was just always a place that I felt comfortable. And I never really narrowed in on science until relatively later, but I just generally enjoyed learning to a certain extent. So I really enjoyed maths. I really enjoyed English literature. I read tons of books when I was growing up. I just loved learning to a certain extent.
So it wasn't necessarily the subject area as such. It was that you had the thirst for knowledge.
Yeah, to a certain, there were definitely subjects that I disliked, like geography. I don't know why, but I really hated it. And now I look back and I'm like, actually, it's quite interesting. I'm always reading and trying to learn something about it. But I think you're right. I think it really was that thirst for knowledge and learning something new. And I think I still see that now. I'm always trying to learn something new. But yeah.
So so what was it then that got you interested in the sciences then? Because if you had this overall desire to learn, where was it that desire then came for you to say, oh, right, sciences, go down that route? Was there a particular tipping point? Were you pushed in that direction by your parents, or was it your own decision? What was it?
Yeah, I wasn't pushed into any direction by my parents. My parents were surprisingly relaxed about that kind of thing. They were just like, just be amazing at whatever you do, essentially. But I think I got pushed into a route because of our UK schooling system. Essentially, you have to make choices. So when I was in probably around GCSE, you have to start narrowing down the topics that you're going to take. So I was really into art. So I took art, I took history as well. I actually didn't want to take science as a subject because I was like, Miss, I'm not sure this is something that I necessarily want to do.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in arts and history. I like science, but when you're looking at the subjects, I'm like, I'm not sure where this is going to fit in.
Yeah.
But I had this teacher, Miss Rahman, and she just said, you should take sciences just to keep your options open. You never know if you'll want to take it further down the line. And I thought, that sounds like good advice. I'll take science then. So yeah, it was just, I think it was the school system that kind of narrowed me down. And then when I got to GCSEs, one thing that happened is I didn't want to take double science, which is what you needed if you wanted to do A level further down. But my teacher said I should take it to keep my options open. But then my school changed like the examining board they had when I did my GCSEs. So I think we used to be AQA or something, and then we moved to EdExcel, and then we moved to like more of a modular system. So that meant that every single person at my school who was doing double science got upgraded to triple science, and everyone that was doing single got upgraded to double. So I basically went from not wanting to do science to doing triple science, which was quite surprising for me. But I think that was probably the reason I ended up narrowing down at the end, was because I was able to split up the subjects into different topics. So I got a specific grade for biology, chemistry, and physics, which meant that I was able to narrow down what I was actually interested in. And that's when I started really enjoying biology and narrowing down in that way. And I also had a really good science teacher who really made science really interesting. But I still took history up until A level.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you had quite an eclectic, you had quite a wide passion for learning, as we've said. Yeah. And it was almost like serendipity that kind of like put you down the science route because of changes which you had no control over, but they've worked out to give you that passion for biology in itself. Can you just give us a sense then of when you were then choosing what type of A levels and degree subjects, what was the thought patterns then? What was it that influenced you? Did you have any role models or anything like that?
You know what? Before I went to so when I was choosing my A levels, because I found that I really enjoyed biology and I also enjoyed chemistry, so I decided I'd do biology and chemistry. I always enjoyed maths, so from day one, I'd always enjoyed maths. So I also did maths, and I did history because it was something I wanted to continue. When I was picking degrees, yeah, so my school was a good school in some ways. It was a good school, but it wasn't necessarily the school that was channeling people into the top university. So everyone went to university, but it wasn't necessarily a Russell Group university. So I was thinking about doing medicine, essentially. So I remember I was watching lots of Hobie City and Casualty, and I was like, oh, I like science, you know. If you're going to do science, that's medicine, right? Yeah. And I don't think I really fully understood the breadth of what science could be. So I just thought medicine's what I want to do. But actually, I was the kind of person that was I read a lot of the stuff that you're supposed to do. And I know you're supposed to do the UK CAT test before doing medicine as a degree. And I remember talking to my school advisor and saying, I need to sign up for this UK CAT thing. And they were like, no, you don't have to do that. The school does that on your behalf. I was like, oh, okay, really? I really read this thing that said that I had to do it myself. They're like, no, it's us. I was like, okay. So maybe the day before the UK CAT registration closes, my school gets in touch with everyone that was considering doing medicine and went, oh my gosh, guys, we've just realized that you guys were supposed to book this test. And they basically got us all in a room and went, see if you can find a test somewhere in England. Bear in mind, I don't have a credit card. I was like calling my sister and going, do you have a card that I can book this test somewhere in like deep in Portsmouth somewhere in time for me to go to university and this kind of thing? Shocking, right?
My mouth's still hitting the floor, girl.
Yeah, so this is what I say, it's like there was a lack of experience. So I wasn't able to apply for medicine if I wanted to, because I hadn't got the UK CAT. So the decision was, do I apply for a university that uses the MCAT, which is, I think it was UCL or Imperial at the time, or something slightly different. And I, what was confusing, it was a real turning moment for me, because a lot of people were really upset because, as you imagine, their dream has been shattered by the school. But I was having this feeling of relief of like, is this actually what I want to do? Like, I'm not actually sure I want to do medicine. Maybe I was just doing medicine because that's what you do. And I was just having this overwhelming feeling of like relief rather than, oh gosh, I'm shattered, my dreams are over. So I just kind of made a decision that I was going to either apply for biomedical sciences or maths, because those are two things that I was interested in. And then at the end, I decided to do biomedical sciences, and I decided that if I still wanted to do medicine at the end of that degree, then I would apply for it because you could go in graduate. But yeah, schooling.
It's strange because the first story that you told us about how basically because of changes you went from almost not doing sciences to ending up doing triple sciences, and it was just by changes in the school registration, etc. And then here a situation where the school and listening to the advice from the school put you almost like at a disadvantage as to where you could potentially end up. Was it the same school? Did you switch?
No, it was the same school.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to ask the name of the school, but
I've heard the school is excellent now, and they're outstanding, and it's all fantastic, and it's not a bad school. It's just they didn't. There's things that they probably have learned now. They just didn't necessarily have people going on to do medicine, and they didn't necessarily have people going to places that weren't polytechnic or ex-polytechnic. So I just don't think they had that experience. So
and then did you talk with anybody else? Did you have any role models, anyone else who had potentially have gone through the system who weren't connected necessarily to the school? Because the reason why I asked that question is just for many young people, especially if their parents haven't gone through higher education, it's kind of like the school is where they think the beacon of truth is, and they'll direct you in the right direction. And sometimes you guys had identified a problem, saying that we think we have to register. There's a no. And so it's kind of like, where were your sources of information coming from?
I feel like my sources of information are probably quite similar for people who have parents that didn't go to university within the UK. So my parents were not the source of knowledge in this. I didn't necessarily have sources of people who had gone through the system. The school was my knowledge. So what the school said is what I need to follow. And then whatever research I decided to do myself. And I guess the thing I have to kind of stress is I was really, really, really wanted to go to university. Like I was determined because like, I guess my family background was kind of your normal immigrant story, moved here, really striving for better. And you look at what your parents have achieved and you're like, this is great, but I feel like I would like my life to be easier and a bit better and more comfortable. So like for me, it was just very much, I had the goal that I'm going to university. So I did a lot of research and a lot of reading. And I went to university fairs and I spoke to people there, but I don't think I had in particular one person I could kind of talk to about the decision. And it's interesting because it's something that I've spoken to with some of my friends since we've left the school. And I went to King's and a lot of them went to really good universities, but generally not, mostly post-1992 universities. And we're like, how did you end up there, Faith? Versus like, the rest of us didn't even think to go to somewhere like King's. And I think it's just, I just did a lot of reading and I was just very determined. And to a certain extent, I had the tick from school which said Faith is a smart person. So I had that like Faith is smart. So then, because of that, I think the school puts a little bit more effort into you than they do in other students. But yeah, there wasn't like an external person that I could necessarily go to and talk to about it outside of connections, which was a general career thing that existed at the time.
It's very interesting that you should say that about where your friends ended, where they went to university and where you went to university. Could it also be the fact that you wanted to do medicine? And so many of the universities which were on your radar would have automatically been Russell Group universities because they were the ones who were offering that. So you didn't necessarily look at the lower tier for biomedical sciences, because you still had that ambition to say you wanted to go on to do potentially go on to do medicine.
Yeah, that is a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think that, but I also think I look at the league table and went, that's a league table from 1 to 10. And I kind of went, these universities are nowhere near the league table. And
Yeah.
also, to be honest, on the subjects that I was looking at, biomedical sciences, at the time when I went to university, most of them were asking for freebies.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there wasn't actually that much of a difference in like, for example, Imperial, they weren't asking for higher grades than UCL or King's or even like anywhere else per se, apart from like some of the post 1992 universities were looking for very much lower grades, but there wasn't really that much grade variation. So it was more to do with, I guess, whether or not I had the confidence to apply. And I do think, I do even think I didn't apply to UCL, even though I applied to a lot of the other universities.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I didn't apply is because UCL were doing interviews, which the other universities were not doing. And I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to pass an interview, so I'm not going to apply there. So yeah, it was weird. Like I felt like I had a push to my school that this was something that I should do and pursue. And like, there was never a Faith, don't apply there. But there was also never a push of like, have you looked at Imperial? They've got the same grades. Is that somewhere you could go? So yeah, it was a mix.
That's really interesting, that in itself, in just that selection process and the process of going through which potential universities you would go to. So you went and did biomedical sciences at King's. What was that experience like for you? What did you think of the place? How did you gain your sense? Did you have a sense of belonging when you were going through the university?
King's was a really interesting experience to me because I grew up in London. Obviously, I went to a diverse school. It was an all-girls school. And I got to King's and I felt like that was the first time I ever met people who were wealthy, essentially. People who were like, not that there were lots of middle-class people in my school, but just probably the first time I met people who went on holiday every single year and went really far and all this kind of stuff. And I think for me, it took a long time at the beginning to be like, how did I get here? It's almost like I think back sometimes and I'm sitting there going, I should have been like, wow, you've done really well to get here. You've done really well. Not thinking, oh, they're going to find out. Why am I here? So I found at least the first couple of weeks at university and like even just talking through different subjects. I remember going to a course and being like, oh my gosh, this is all over my head. They're gonna find out, why am I here? Like, I don't know, because you go from feeling really smart in your school and then you end up in this pool and you're just like, I'm average here.
How did that make you feel?
I found that really hard because I think that was my identity to a certain extent. I was a smart girl, I was put your books in, work really hard. And I was just average, just so average. So it took a long time to kind of, I guess, build that up again. But I think King's was a good experience for me because although there was some identity stuff right at the beginning, I really did find my tribe with people. And I think it was really nice because it was a time where I found a group of people who just kind of got me. I think the thing about going off to university is that, you kind of get rid of all the shackles of like, I was a really quiet girl that didn't speak to anyone, and you're just like, okay, I'm here now, I'm Faith. I can be whoever I will say I want to be, and like, here we go.
Yeah.
So,
you had the chance to reinvent yourself almost.
Yeah, I did. And I did really enjoy my student experience, and I really enjoyed the subjects that I was learning, and it's where I fell in love with immunology. And I really enjoyed King's.
That's really good. I like that you found your tribe and you were able to. Would you say that you were able to blossom and thrive, not just in your subject area, but also in finding out who Faith is, who Faith was?
I think it did. And I think, it really helped me. I don't know if I was still in my early 20s. I did not know who Faith was, really. But it definitely helped me understand who I was more. And I think even just the basic thing of like not having my family around me and having to figure out like because I didn't live at home, even though I look back sometimes, I'm like, you were in London. You really could have saved that money. But it was important for me to like move out and just like.
Hello? Hello? What's happened here?
No, we can hear you, but
Okay.
I think
Oh,
Wayne.
Wayne froze. Okay,
Right, I
cool.
froze, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Carry
that's
on.
fine. Thank you. Yeah, so it was just, yeah, it was really helpful for me to, yeah, kind of figure out how I could be. And I met a lot of people from lots of different cultures as well, which I found really interesting at King's, because when I was at school, although it was a diverse school in some ways, it was a Catholic school. So it wasn't really actually until I went off to university that I met people from lots of different faiths. So it was also really interesting to learn about other traditions, like learning about Diwali, learning about Eid. So I think it also just opened up my eyes to what existed in the world outside of what was quite narrow in like a Catholic state school. So yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions based on, so it was a it was a revealing, eye-opening, a learning experience that you were going through. I'm going to ask this question. Throughout your time, did you have many role models within the university? Did you have any teachers or tutors who saw your potential and encouraged you in any way? Because you said you fell in love well, that's where you kind of like started to feel a passion for immunology. So what was it about immunology that kind of like said, yeah?
Yeah. It was, so in my first year of my degree, so I started on the biomedical sciences degree, and towards the end of my first year, when you're picking out what you're going to do as your second year modules, because we did like a common year one, so everyone did the same thing. We had like these 2 lectures called lectures, like immunology taster lectures, where they just gave us 2 1-hour lectures around the immune system and how it worked. And I went to that and was sitting there, it's like, this is really interesting. I've never really heard much about the immune system and how it works. And I decided to take the second year module after that. So when I took the second year module, I basically learned more about how the immune system worked in health and disease. And I think I just really enjoyed how complicated it was and how it just all seemed to fit together and work together. And yeah, I just quite enjoyed learning about it as a subject. And it was probably the only subject at university that like interested me enough that I would leave university that day, come home, review my notes on the same day. I was not that kind of student, and then like read further if I could. And I think it was just, I just found, I can't really describe it. And I don't really know what about immunology made that more interesting to me than any other subject, but I just kind of fell in love with it. And I decided to take the third year immunology module after that. So, and then I did the research project. And I don't think I had many people who I looked at as lecturers, apart from, I can name a few. So there was Helen Collins at King's, who taught a lot of the immunology. And I don't know, I just found I really liked the way that she taught it. So I always remember her. And it always made me think, oh, that's a subject I really want to take. In the third year module, we had real researchers who would come and give a lecture. And I remember sitting there going, oh, this is really interesting, because now they're telling me about the basic science, but now they're telling me how that fits into the actual research. And then I did my final year research project, and that was Dr. David Fear. And he was just really nice. I don't know how to explain it. Like, he was just really nice. And he's someone that I always think of even now in my career, because I wouldn't be in the position I'm in now if like he hadn't offered me a job later down the line. And I think he's just one of those people that once he's got a student and he knows that they work hard and they do the work, he will always kind of do what he can to support them, even if it's like years down the line. So yeah, I just fell in love with immunology and how it worked and how the immune system worked. And I think maybe the way it was taught was part of the reason that it stood out to me as well.
Fantastic. So it was good teaching, but it was also people who recognized your potential and nurtured that potential within you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's weird when you think, like, it's not like it wasn't like a specific lecturer who I followed and
Yeah.
constantly
Yeah.
spoke to, but it was just lecturers that just delivered it in such a way that made it really interesting. Yeah.
So at what point was it that you decided to carry on pursuit? When was it that you switched from saying, actually, I would like to go on and do medicine, and then you then decided, actually, I'm going to try and go for a PhD or go on to what was where did the decision making process take place there?
It was complicated. So I feel like the thing with me is, even though I've got to probably about the second year of my PhD of my undergraduate degree, I was like, this immunology stuff is really interesting. I don't know about this medicine thing. So it was already kind of waning already.
Right.
But then when I got to the end and I was finishing up, so I'd spent like 3 months in the lab, or just under. I remember being like, this lab stuff is boring, it's really repetitive, all you do is PCRs every single day, and that is it, like, I just remember doing this and being like, I don't know if I could do this every single day. No. So it was kind of like this moment of like, this is kind of boring. I don't know.
Right, I'm going to have to stop the video here, because
Yeah.
I don't think I can let science be degraded in this way.
Yeah, so it was just like, I think it was the repetitiveness of the lab work while I was doing my final year project was just, I wasn't sure about it.
Yeah.
So I finished off that project and I decided that I wasn't going to apply for something straight away, and I was going to take some time to like think through my options. So I'd always had in the back of my mind, I was like, maybe I still want to do medicine, maybe that's the thing, maybe I could still consider this science thing, maybe it's just maybe this project, it was a bit repetitive, maybe it's something else, but I don't know about this lab work thing. And maybe teaching, because I always had in the back of my mind potentially teaching as like a thing that I could be interested in doing. So I remember talking to the career people at King's and asking them about what I can do. And they were telling me about this program with the Institution of Education, where you can kind of go and do a little bit of teaching for maybe a few months or something like that, try it out, and then maybe do teaching. And then I thought, oh, maybe I can do another medicine kind of work experience or something like that. Because I'd done that before when I thought I was interested in medicine. I'd done work experience when I was younger. I was like, maybe I'll do it now again. And maybe I'll try being a scientist. I was like, I'm going to take a year out. I'm going to figure it all out. And then I took the year. I went to the person about the Institution of Education. They're like, you can only do that when you're a student. You have graduated, Faith, now. I was like, oh my gosh, this has gone wrong. Just like, not ideal. And then the home medicine thing, I was like, maybe I can follow that up. But at the moment, I was like, this has kind of gone wrong. I need some money now. So I worked as a street fundraiser for a little bit. So that was the job that I did when I was a student in summers. So I'd work as a street fundraiser. The person that came to you on the street and would be like, hey, I'm Faith. Have you thought about donating to Amnesty International? So I was that person. Yeah. So I did that for a while. And I guess to cut this long story short is, while I was doing that job, I went from being a street fundraiser to leading a team of fundraisers to being a manager of fundraising. And that was all good and dandy. But then I was like, I just miss science. I literally just miss science. I miss research. I miss everything about that. And I was like, you know what? But I guess I was just used to going to work. It was just normal. And then they decided to get rid of the division that I was working in. Yes. So they were like, we can move you or we can make you redundant. I was like, you know what? Let me take this opportunity. I'm living at home. Let me become redundant. So I was redundant, and I basically decided that I would take this opportunity to look for a science job. And the one thing about fundraising is that you speak to so many different people. So I've actually spoken to people and they're like, have you thought about being a research assistant? I was like, I didn't know about this position. It was a bit serendipitous, but yeah, so that was why I started looking at research assistant jobs and applying for research assistant jobs. But then eventually, the reason I got a job as a research assistant was because I emailed Dave Fear, who I told you about earlier, because I still have this mantra to a certain extent: if you don't ask, you don't get. So
Yeah.
I asked him, and I was like, you know what? I need some work experience. I'm applying for all these jobs, and like they're asking for experience that I don't have. I have 12 weeks in the lab. I can't compare to these master's students / these people that have got years. I was like, can I work in the lab for free? I'm more than happy to. I just need some experience. And then he just said that he had a position coming up soon, and actually he'll be in touch. And I was like, I'll have a job by then. That's fine. I did not. So when the position came up, I applied for it, and then I got the position. And I think that was the turning point, because being in the lab, being a research assistant, and then seeing other PhD students and seeing lots of research that other people were doing, that's what inspired me to think, actually, this is something I would like to do, and actually understanding that research was much more broad than just doing PCRs with a single pipette and doing a 364 well plate. So yeah.
So it was not out of necessity, it was kind of necessity, but it was now almost a realization that actually there is a potential. I can develop this, it can help to develop me as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and wind this up a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. Your PhD, what happened? What happened? How long were you a research assistant, and what then made you? Because there's lots of people who I know who do the research assistant position, but never do that translation to go on and get their PhD. What was it that triggered it? Where, again, did you get any advice? What was the trigger?
I think it's a mixture of things. So it was seeing other PhD students and talking to other PhD students about their work, and thinking, oh, that's really interesting. That's something I can do. And then being like, yeah, Faith, you could definitely do it. You've got all the skills. So there was encouragement that way. There was also talking to my supervisor and talking to him about what could I do next, that kind of thing. He was definitely someone that was supporting me at that point in my career. But I think it was also natural. It came from, as a research assistant, as a role that I was doing, I was very much being told what to do. And I think I kind of learned over time that if I was a PhD student, I would be able to lead the project, and I'd learn how to lead the project. So I think it was that kind of natural transition almost from learning what you could do if you had a PhD, and going from there. But also the whole time when I was looking for work, one thing that I was really interested in doing was also doing a master's. And I was also trying to save up to do a master's as well at the same time. Then they jumped in price, and I was like, well, that's not happening. But the reason I mention that is because I was quite intentional when I applied for PhDs. I applied for 1+3 PhDs because I thought, if I started the process and I don't like the master's, then I don't have to go on to do the PhD part. But I've got my master's that I was looking for, and therefore I could get other jobs, be a bit more strategic with it.
No, I like that. That demonstrates learning. Now you are taking control of what you were going to be doing, unlike when you were thinking about planning for medicine and you went and sought advice from the school. Even though you had done your research, now you were actually backing up the research that you had done with an intentional action. So you intentionally said, MSc fees are too high, right? And therefore, let me see if I can get something which combines the two. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And so where did you get to do that? And what was that process like for you?
So I applied for a PhD master's program with the MRC and Asthma UK Centre for Allergic Disease. So it was split between King's and Imperial. And the reason I did my master's at Imperial is because they had a policy that if you did your undergraduate at King's, they would send you to Imperial. Like, there wasn't really a choice. They wanted you to make sure that you experienced somewhere else. So that's why I ended up doing the MRes in biomedical research with a focus on respiratory and cardiovascular medicine at Imperial. And then there was a whole load of projects that I could pick for my PhD. And I chose a project that was based at Imperial. So that's why I stayed at Imperial. But there was always the option that if I found a project at King's that I was interested in, I could have gone to King's, because it was a joint program between the two universities.
Right. So, And so it's very interesting that they had that split to say, if you've done it here, we want you to go and experience somewhere else, which I think is also very good. So you don't become institutionalized, which is really good. Give us I'm just wary of that we're and there's so many other things which I want to try and sneak in. Give us an idea of what your PhD was and how that then led you into your postdoc position. And I'm looking for the decision-making processes that led you to those activities.
Okay, so my PhD was looking at a type of immune cell called the T follicular helper cell. And I looked at how the role that it played in allergic asthma, and I used mice as a model to look at the connection between their cells and the disease. I did the PhD at Imperial. It was around 4 years, and I think the decision point of switching was the fact that I really enjoyed my PhD. I think I was really, really lucky. I was in a lab that my group leader, when I started, I was his first ever PhD student. So it's a very different experience than when you're thrown into a massive lab. It was a much more nurturing experience, and it was a lab that I felt like I could truly be myself. So it was a very small lab, and we were embedded within a larger department that had lots of different PhD students. So I had a really good cohort effect. And if I needed advice, there was always someone from the year above. And, there was also people below who could ask me for advice. I think the decision to continue was interesting, because when I left my PhD, I kind of knew that I didn't want to be a group leader. I'd already made that decision that I never really wanted to start my own group, but I knew that I really enjoyed research, and I wanted to continue doing research. I was still exploring other things. Like I always enjoyed public engagement or outreach. And those are things that I was also considering, but I was still weighing up the idea of these more of hobbies that I like doing versus things that I'd like to do as like my main job. So the decision to switch and do my postdoc at the Crick was the fact that I finished my PhD, and then I was lucky enough to have a job with my supervisors, one of my supervisors, for a year while I was writing up my PhD so I could be paid. And when I got to the end of that, I started looking at jobs that could be related. I was still really interested in the immune system. I was still really interested in the cells that I was working on. So I looked in the germinal center, which is a structure, but there's 2 types of immune cells in there. You have your T follicular helper cell and you have B cells. I was still really interested in those 2 cells. So I wanted to continue working on at least one of them. So the postdoc that I ended up getting was looking at B cells, still looking at germinal centers, the structures, but it was just in a different disease. And I was quite intentional that I wanted to try a different disease, because the lab that I worked in, where I was a research assistant, and the lab that I did my PhD in, and because the center I was asthma and allergic disease, so I'd only ever studied allergic disease. So I was quite intentional that I just wanted to learn a slightly different disease, which is why I looked into malaria. So my postdoc ended up being in malaria and cancer, but still looking at the cells that I was interested in, that I did my PhD in.
So it was again much more intentional. So it seems that as you got
within reason.
Within reason.
Within reason. It was very much the job advert came up and that was what I saw. But at the same time, I was really interested in autoimmune disease. And that would have been my ideal project, I think, autoimmune disease. But that didn't necessarily come up when I was looking.
Right. Okay. So how did we transition then to what you're doing now? What was the steps to going from there? You did mention earlier on that you started to do EDI work. Was there any reason that why you felt that you were looking down that road? What was the rationale there?
So when I was leaving Imperial, so the year that was when I was handing in my thesis, and like when I was just generally looking at like what I wanted to do next, and you've mentioned in like multiple questions of did you have someone to talk to ask advice and this kind of stuff. I think in a lot of the environments that I've been before where I didn't necessarily have that advice, I think being Black in that environment wasn't really a consideration per se when I was in school. It was poor advice, but I wasn't worried that the advice would be different because I'm Black per se. But I think being at university, my supervisor had a very candid relationship with him where I could ask lots of questions, but fundamentally he's not a Black woman and he hasn't navigated academia. So like there wasn't really anyone that I could talk to about those specific concerns. And when I was towards the end of my PhD, I was kind of looking for that kind of advice, like even things like, should I move to the States? It's like, you could do that, but what does that look like if you're moving to the States as a Black woman when there's all kinds of issues happening there? So that's when I started trying to find out a bit more. So I did this campaign about Black researchers, and I posted that on Twitter. And I guess that got me involved in much more EDI work. And when I was at the CRIC, I joined our race equity network. And there I learned and met so many people that cared so deeply about the issue around race within academia, and were actively doing stuff within the institution, but also further to try and change that. So I think it was spending lots of time in that EDI space on the side of my day job, as well as spending time doing outreach and public engagement. I think altogether that kind of summed up to me that the things that I really cared, I loved my research and I really enjoyed it, but I also really, really cared about the people. And I think a thing that happened for me, which probably happened a lot for people, is that when I moved to the CRIC, it was 2019, and I was still recovering from a PhD. So like it needed a year of recovery. And then I got to 2020 and I was like, this is the year I'm gonna live, guys. I'm gonna do it. Let's go big. And then we had a pandemic. So it was just like not great timing. So I think it was that time of like going into work, into the lab, but there was nothing else happening. It was just me going into the lab, doing my lab work, going back home, not even really interacting with other people. Conferences were something of the past. It was just me and my mice, essentially, to a certain extent. And I think it just really made me start considering and thinking about, is this actually really what I want to be doing? Are there other things that I'm interested in? And my project that I did as my postdoc, I fundamentally did not love it as much as my project that I did for my PhD. So it was like, not loving the project as much as the project I did during my PhD, the combination of finding interest in other places that kind of helped me want to make that shift. And I always knew, like I said before, that I didn't want to be a group leader. So it was just, I think it was natural. Sometimes I think, I could have considered industry a bit more maybe, but like at the same time, I think it was the natural progression for me.
I'm going to just push you on two final things, right? And it's just that involvement in the EDI space that you became much more involved with. Because there's one thing to say, okay, I look around and I see that there's not many of us here, right? But it's another thing to say, well, there's not many of us here, but I want to understand why there's not many and how that impacts on me and other people who look like me. So what was it that kind of like gave you that passion to say, actually, I want to do something about this?
Yeah, I think it's a bit to do with my personality, to be honest. I don't know, I'm not comfortable in spaces where things aren't okay. The best way of describing it. So like, I'll use the example of like, if you've got somewhere where there's bullying going on, I can't comfortably sit in that space and watch it. I will go up to that person and be like, are you okay? Is there anything we can do for you? How can we support you? And I think it's partly my personality, but also thinking we can change these things. I don't know. Maybe it was just like, maybe it was a naivety to a certain extent of like not necessarily understanding the complexities behind the structures. But for some things, I'm just sitting there going, it doesn't have to be this way. We can change it. And I also think at the time, I had discovered Twitter. So I was discovering more and more Black scientists. And it was a community of people that I was meeting who were saying the same thing. And it just felt like I was around like-minded people who wanted to bring about change. So I think I also got swept up in that of like, we can do this, we can change something. So yeah, I think it was just something that happened there. I think that combination of when you are Black within the academic space, and you put yourself more and more in that space anyway, I think people kind of look to you a bit more anyway. So if I put myself in the committee, then there's almost like an association that, oh, Faith does these things. And then more and more opportunities started presenting themselves to me for things that I could do or do as well. So I think it's I think it's natural, and I also think it's also a thing that a lot of Black academics end up not having to do, but almost feeling like they have to do, because you sit there and you're going, it can't be like this for the next generation. It really can't. Like, people shouldn't have to struggle. And the more you read, like, everything you read is just so depressing. You just feel like you've got to do something. Yeah, and I feel that's why in my current job, I really enjoy that I can do something tangible about it as well.
So, not in closing, but finally, just give us a sense of what it is that you've moved into, and what is it that you'd like to see it, how would you like, because essentially, tell us a little bit about it, because I think it encapsulates the idea of belonging. So could you give us a glimpse of that?
Yeah, so my job now is I'm at the Wellcome Trust, which is a research funder, and my role is a research culture and community specialist. And the job that I'm doing comes out of the idea that Wellcome did a massive report, which was published in early 2020, where they looked at what research culture looks like. And it showed that it was a bullying, competitive place that can be quite negative, where a lot of people work in cultures that are not ideal, which is not a diverse place, where people don't feel included. And I think off the back of that report, Wellcome was like, we need to do something to change it. And as Wellcome is in a very powerful position, they basically launched a department, which I'm part of, called Research Environment, where we think a lot about how research is done and not the research that's done. So my job as a research culture specialist is really thinking about how do we assess science? Like, what do we call, not even just science, research? Like, what is a good research culture? Is a good research culture is somewhere that is positive. It's somewhere where anyone can do the work that they'd like to. It's a place where people are rewarded, not just for the research they do, but also for how they treat others, for the fact that we reward teams. We don't reward people who are competitive and just push other people out of the way to succeed. And what we're doing is I'm working internally within Wellcome with lots of different teams who are designing funding calls or ways of funding people to think about how they can make those calls much more inclusive, but also how they can make those calls more likely to promote positive research cultures and not promote negative ones. And I also am working to put programs in place that can better support researchers. So one of the things that we're doing is we're putting together a dedicated funding stream right now to support Black researchers. Another thing we're doing is looking at how we can support networks that support the careers of Black researchers. Other people are looking at how we can do institutional funds that support institutions to put in place systems that are able to support more positive research cultures. So it's really just thinking about how we can improve research in general so that it's a more inclusive place. So it's a place that's less competitive, one that's more creative, more collaborative. I always just say it's a kinder and nicer place to be in. Basically just creates the kind of workplace that we all want to do research in. So yeah.
You see, that's why I said where your journey has taken you to a place where you're actually promoting a better sense of belonging for everybody in the science culture workplace, in the science culture, in the research culture that we're developing. So I'm gonna normally I would open up the floor for questions, right? But we've gone on a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the questions for anyone who wants to ask after this. I'm going to ask my last two. We'll cut the recording and then we'll stay on for a little bit longer afterwards, okay? And then people can ask questions. I'm going to ask these two final questions. I'm going to ask first, what advice would you have given to your 16-year-old self, right? About where you would go, what you would end up doing? Or what advice would you give them? Any advice? And then the other question that I'm going to ask is, what would your 16-year-old self look at you and say, wow? What thing do you think that they'd look and say, wow, that's me?
Oh gosh, wow. There's a question. I'm thinking of my 16-year-old self. My 16-year-old self was a very quiet person and did not say a lot. So I'd probably say to my 16-year-old self, I'd be like, you know what? It's okay. You'll get through this and it'll be fine. I think that's what I want to tell, because I feel like 16-year-old me she had fun, but she was very, very serious. I would probably tell her to relax a little bit, actually. I'd probably tell her to relax and just live a little bit. Like, you're only going to be 16 once. Enjoy life. I think 16-year-old Faith would probably look at me now and be like, you know what? I think we should be happy with where we are. That's what I'm going to go with. I think she'll be really surprised that she can call herself Dr. Faith, I'd say, because we did not have that. Or she'll probably be really happy that she can call herself Dr. Faith, because she still had the ambitions of being a medical doctor, but now she's a PhD. So yeah, I think I'd probably look and be proud, actually. And yeah. And I feel like my mum would, and my 16-year-old would probably be like, oh yeah, mum's probably happy right now.
Well, as long as mum's happy, that's a good start. That's all I'm saying. That's a good start. Faith, you've been absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I've loved our conversation today. And you know, I'm always here to talk to you. And we have such good conversations, and long may they continue in whichever role you adopt. But so yeah, it's a really, thank you so much for sharing your experience and giving us some insight into how you are actually working on making research culture a much more inclusive, so that everyone feels that they belong. Yeah. Right? And I think that's it's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I was a little bit nervous, but actually I've really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just share the screen so that people will see what's happening next week. Not next week, in 2 weeks' time it will be. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have Professor Palab Mulik, and he's the Deputy Director and Director of Research from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, but he's also a Provost Visiting Professor of Mental Health at Imperial College. So he's going to be with us at our usual time of 12:30 till 1:30 in 2 weeks' time. Next week, it's because of the coronation, I thought I'd give everyone a long weekend so they can start their parties early. If you have missed any of the other episodes before, then please go to our YouTube channel and you can catch up with the different ones at tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. That's where you can find the videos. The other thing that I'd like to just highlight is we're almost at 150. Actually, I should have said our next guest will be our 3-year anniversary. It's 3 years old on the 8th of May, but 12th of May we'll have to do. And these are many of the individuals who have contributed and been part of this journey of belonging. And without their stories, without hearing their experiences, we wouldn't have a better insight of what it means to belong. So Faith's her picture's going to be transitioning its way up there as well, because her story is now on there as well. So we want to just once again say a big thank you to everyone who has come and listened. And if anyone wants to stay behind and have a conversation, then please do. But once again, have a good weekend, good bank holiday weekend, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.